Good morning, everybody. I am Claire Lawrence. I am a middle-aged, probably late middle-aged, but I don't really want to admit it, white woman. My pronouns are she, her, and I am wearing a black t-shirt and a velvet flowy thing. I don't know quite what you would call this. And I am going to give your sermon today, which is called Tell Me a Story. Also, I have to apologize. My voice is still a little shaky from my bout with whooping cough, which is just fabulous. And we had all of these lovely announcements with people who are sick. So all I can say is wash your hands, people. It is the time to wash your hands. When I began writing this sermon, ironically enough, at a cafe in Columbus, Ohio called Parable, I was at once overwhelmed by the many ways I could talk with you about the concept of stories, which is our theme this month. In a very real way, we are people made of stories. Stories of our experiences, our families, our ancestors, our countries, our politics, our spiritual lives, our bodies. The list is near endless. As Unitarian Universalists, we are called to pay attention not just to the way we would tell our own stories, but to the stories of others. We are warned against falling for what the writer Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie would call the danger of a single story. That means guarding against the assumption that because someone is working class or African American or queer or addicted, we automatically know their story and can take ownership of it by telling it ourselves. Finally, and not unrelatedly, we are at a time in history when a particular story of the United States is being written by those about to be in power, which for many of us is downright sinister. How do we create a counter-narrative when we feel voiceless and defeated? It's enough to paralyze any sermon writer. Quite literally, as I sit here at my computer, I can feel the stories of everyone in the cafe and everything I've ever taught my students about stories, and my own multiple stories swirling around me. It's hard to catch hold of anything except this phrase that keeps repeating itself in my brain. Tell me a story. For me, there is so much joy in that small request, and I think that joy is the place I want to start. Did anyone tell you stories when you were young? Can you remember what that felt like? Does anyone tell them to you now? Tell me a story. I believe one of the first sentences I strung together was this one, a request for something very basic and human, a distraction, a reflection, a lesson, and most importantly for this sermon, a comfort and a connection. Tell me a story. You see, my beloved Aunt Honey was a fantastic storyteller. Her tales had talking crocodiles and thimble-sized dogs and faraway lands and exciting battles, yet they were also connected to my everyday life. When I was maybe 4 and getting ready for bed, we would lay out my clothes on the bed as if they were animated beings. She told stories of the summer people, my undershirt and underpants, and the winter people, my outer clothes, and how they drank tea and flew to Spain. However, my favorite stories were the ones about Princess Claire, my alter ego, and Plata, also my alter ego, but ugly, green-skinned, and most importantly, naughty. Princess Claire had perfect adventures that matched her perfect hair and perfect clothes. Plata always tried to ruin everything, but she never succeeded. As I got older, my auntie let me tell parts of the story myself. It was great fun to live vicariously through my little green id. We broke things and played in the dirt in our good clothes and ate ice cream for breakfast. Tell me a story. If there is one sentence that describes my entire professional life, this is it. I am fairly certain that my auntie's early storytelling and the fact that she was also an English teacher made me into who I am today, a professional storyteller who also helps others create their own stories. For 25 years, I have been inviting class after class, student after student, to tell me a story. The tales I have heard over the years run the gamut from gorgeous to painful to shocking to epically sad. Some of them are memoirs and some of them are not, but they are all personal and revealing. One of the most important things I have tried to teach young writers has always been the only worthwhile thing to do with pain is make it into art. Tell me a story, and I'll tell you one back. My auntie was born in Utah to my grandmother, who was a community leader that kept an obsessively clean house, and my grandfather, who drank a little too much and traveled around the West developing mines. After college, she taught in South San Francisco for 30 years. She moved there because the man she was engaged to cheated on her with someone else. She was brilliant, terribly funny, wildly creative, and very mentally ill. One of the saddest parts of her story was that she was born into a time and a family that refused to get her any help. Aunt Honey was 6 feet tall, and she wore her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She modeled for a few years. After she passed, I read one of her yearbooks and found out that all of her high school students fell in love with her. She never married or had children of her own, so she was always mine. I held her hand up until half an hour before she died, which she did in privacy as soon as I went home to take a shower. When you heard my story, what happened to you? How many of you have had a troubled relative that you loved desperately? How many of you have adored one of your teachers? Who has been to San Francisco? Who has helped someone die? If you answer yes to any of these questions, then you were in my story too. What I told you was true, but even if it had been fiction, you would have still recognized yourself. I don't quite have the words for this connection between writer and reader, speaker and audience, but I know it is sacred. For me, music isn't art without a listener, any more than painting is art without a viewer. A story, then, is a connection. That's the definition. Thinking of a story as a connection opens up so much. Like the Sankofa bird, if we share our past with someone, we are also, in a way, sharing our future. On its website, Parable Cafe, where I wrote this sermon, writes a story about revolutionizing the service industry by charging more for its products, but paying its workers a living wage so they don't have to survive on tips. Even more importantly, the owners say, telling their parable also inspires others to do the same. That connection again. So tell me a story. I've been asking you to do this throughout my talk, but now I'm really going to ask it. And my lovely assistant is going to pass out a piece of paper and some pens that might even help with that. So this last part of my sermon is going to require a little bit of interaction on your part, but don't worry, it's voluntary, not mandatory. I'm not your professor. I'm not grading you. I'm going to ask you, though, to do one of the favorite exercises that I've done from my nonfiction classes, and that is write a 6-word memoir. This exercise is taken from the famous tale about Ernest Hemingway, who supposedly, when he was asked to write a novel in 6 words as a bar bet, replied, "For sale, baby shoes, never worn." For sale, baby shoes, never worn. I'm sure you're all asking, how can I tell my whole life in 6 words? May I remind you that our lives are made up of stories. And even if I gave you 10,000 words, you probably wouldn't get it all in. So just give it a try. Here are a few examples from the interwebs. My life lived inside my head. I still make coffee for 2. That one's really sad. Others seldom rose to my expectations. I kind of feel that one. Peer pressure made me do it. Learn to teach, teach to learn. And then absolutely fabulously, she's not here, but before the service, one of our kids, Aria, wrote one, and hers is, "Sometimes I am like a bug," which I think is adorable. And then I have 3 of mine, and those are all on the paper for you as well. Storyteller makes art out of pain. Taught for 25 years, tired now. And still punk, just bought new dogs. And so, beloved community, tell me a story, just a very small one. Again, I have some paper and pens for you if you inhabit the 21st century. You could also do it in your phone notes, however you want to do it. I'm going to be quiet for about 3 minutes and give you time to write. Then for that all-important connection part, I'm going to ask you to share your 6-word memoirs with me and the other members of the congregation during coffee hour. If you're online, of course, you can type them into the chat. I look forward to our time of sacred connection. May we be comforted and healed by our sharing. Blessed be.